Howdy, friends, and welcome to the StoryField. This is a podcast where we talk about business, faith, and life in general.
Okay, so here's the deal. We want you to be encouraged. We want you living in hope. This life we live is complex. It's hard at times. At the StoryField, you will find great stories of normal people just like us who will inspire you. Our goal is that you leave encouraged, inspired, and excited to move forward in life. But before we get started, one thing though, if you're listening and you find yourself really hopeless right now, send us an email at hope@thestoryfield.com so we can pray for you. Thanks for joining us today. Let's get started. Okay, so hey StoryField, meet Echo VanderWal. Echo is joining us. I want to get this right, from Eswatini. Did I say that right? Okay.
Yes.
She joined us from Eswatini, formerly Swaziland in southern Africa, across the globe at a different time. So I'm so thankful you made time today from Africa. Welcome to Texas.
Thanks a lot, Josh. Thanks for having us.
You bet. So a little bit on you, and then I'm really, really excited to hear all about what's going on, but a little bit on Echo and her husband, Harry, founded the Luke Commission. Now, the Luke Commission, which you can find online at lukecommission.org, but the Luke Commission provides free, compassionate, and comprehensive, like really patient-centered medical care for about 33% of the entire country of Eswatini, which is amazing. And you guys are the largest non-governmental medical provider in the country. Now, there's so much I want to cover with you, Echo, and the story, but I'm hoping you'll focus on like the God factor in the entire story, because we always want to look to encourage people and give them hope and increase their faith. And I think your story and Harry's story and everybody who's on the ground there is going to do exactly that. So I'm looking for God in the amazing story. So be sure to as things come to mind, encourage us with that. So you two moved to Africa when you had 3-year-old triplets and a boy who was several months old. So you had 4 kids, triplets, and a few month old, and you did that in the height of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And the country had the highest infection rate of HIV. So now the Luke Commission has 700 team members, up from 12 when y'all first got there in 2005. Is that right? When you showed up? Okay. So you went from 12 to 700, 45 departments, and you're operating out of a location you call the Miracle Campus. Again, serving like a third of the country, like 300,000 people per year. So we have some things to chat about. Is that a good intro as far as like kind of where you're at now, and we can get going from there?
You summarized it, yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, at the StoryField, we want to do a little bit of a background story. And so start us a little bit with like kind of a life chronology, and then you can stop when you're 8 years old and you heard a call from the Lord, which is something I really want to talk about. But where'd you grow up? Tell us about your family, and then walk us through the call, and then how did you get from 8-year-old getting called by the Lord overseas to Africa in 2004?
Okay. Well, I grew up in northern Idaho,
Okay.
close to the Canadian border, close to Spokane, and my husband grew up in North Carolina, both in rural areas, which I think God was using that to prepare us for the work that we do in Eswatini. But I grew up in church. My parents took us to church all the time, and on Wednesday night, I was sitting in church and someone was speaking from formerly Zaire, now the DRC or Congo, and they were talking about how much medical work the wife was doing there because there was no health facilities. And I felt at 8 years old that God was calling me to work overseas in healthcare, specifically Africa, not knowing any more than that. And I grew up in a family that was poor, but my parents were really amazing in the fact that they never made us feel impoverished. They never put God in a box or our lives in a box. So I told them that I felt God called me overseas to work in healthcare in Africa after that church service, and they always said things to us like, the sky's the limit, do whatever God calls you to. And then when my husband was 17, similarly, he actually wanted to be a calculus professor. He's super smart. I'm kind of the practical one. He's the academic. And so he went to university to be a calculus professor, and God put him in a room with two missions majors. He always used to think that people that worked for God overseas were just super spiritual. He couldn't really attain that level of spirituality, but God put him in the room with these two guys, and he just realized those guys were the same as him. And so he picked up the college catalog and he flipped through it, and he said, well, I think being a doctor would be a way to impact lives overseas. So he decided to go then into medical school. He's actually a specialist in internal medicine and pediatrics. Okay. I'm a PA in surgery and pediatrics, but I mostly work on the business administration side. But wow. God called us at 8 and 17, and then we met when we were 19, when we were in university, and we graduated when we were 21, got married 3 weeks after we graduated, and we started all of our postgraduate training, which took us until we were 30. As you mentioned, we had triplets while my husband was in his residency, which
that's an easy time to have triplets. Yeah.
And Harry's the more quiet one of the two of us, but he's really wise. And we left when they did the ultrasound. They said there was 3, and he said, we can enjoy this or complain about it. Either way, it's the same amount of work. It's all going to be our attitude. And that really set a stage for us in our work in the country with the highest HIV prevalence rate in the world, because it was really the same. You know, it's a lot of work. We can enjoy it or complain about it. It's all our attitude and how we approach it. But anyway, we had triplets, and it was it was fun, partially because my husband's super involved in raising the kids. Mm-hmm. I love to work, and he loves to take care of the family. So it's been a relationship for us. But then we had a 4th son, all boys. And that's, as you mentioned, when we went to Eswatini for the first time. Actually, in 2004, we came for a scoping visit. And when we came to Eswatini in 2004, it was the first stamp in either one of our passports. We had never left the United States before. And we flew in to an airport, a small airport, and somebody picked us up from the airport and took us out to a rural area. And we saw people, middle-aged, young people, dying everywhere due to HIV. It was the height of the HIV pandemic, the worst of the worst time period. And we started asking the people in the rural areas, like, why are you not going to the hospitals to get help? And they mentioned 2 things. One, they said that the bus fare is very expensive. And if you don't have any income and you have maybe meager resources, of course, they're choosing whether to feed their kids or go to the hospital. And all of us know what our decisions would be in that kind of situation. And so people would wait a long time to go when it was too late. The second thing that they mentioned is that they felt stigmatized or mistreated when they would go to healthcare facilities. And God used those interactions early in our time period in Eswatini to tell us how important the cornerstone of compassion was. And so I'll tell you, at the beginning, we were totally weirdos, you know, like, we then went back to the United States. My husband finished his residency. He took his boards, and the next month we got on the airplane with 4 little boys and moved over to Eswatini. And people said interesting things to us, like, do you think you're committing professional suicide? And all kinds of very interesting things. But we knew that this is where God had called us. And when we first came to Eswatini, we didn't intend to start an organization or to start anything like that. But we looked all around the country, and there was no one who was really focused on taking the care to the people, because we recognized that it's hard for people to go to a fixed site. We needed to move to them. And it was very logistics heavy. And there was nobody in the country really doing that. And so we founded the Luke Commission to respond to the calling that God put on our hearts to serve initially rural communities. And that's what we did for the first 8 years. We worked with a very small team, moved all around the country, everywhere they knew us. They knew the names of our kids. You know, if they didn't see one of the kids, they would ask, where's Jacob? Where's Luke? I mean, it was a very intimate relationship with the people in our country in the rural areas. And then, as you mentioned, in 2013, God opened the door for us to be able to buy a piece of land in the center of the country. It's about 150 acres, and it was a total miracle when that happened. And so I would just say those first 8 years were very much foggy steps of faith. We didn't know what the next step would be, but God would just say, take a step. And like, yeah, well, we don't know what's going to happen after that. He said, I don't care what's going to happen after that. Just take the first one. And
Wow.
it was very much just, a walk with God and really not being super embraced in even the mission space initially, but it was definitely a very, very precious time of our journey where we learned that in the worst of the worst situations, we'll see God do amazing miracles. And so we're really grateful even for that time, which
Okay,
was just,
stop there for a second. Okay, I want to backtrack a tad. So you
okay,
took
no
us
problem.
from, oh, this is awesome. What made you choose the country anyway in the first place in your 2004 visit? Like, why there?
We Why there? Well, Harry had somebody in his residency program who gave us contacts in Eswatini, and we had wanted to, kind of do our virgin trip to
Yeah.
Africa, see what things were like. And then, as I mentioned, when we landed here, we found this really, kind of traumatic situation going on with HIV. At the time, there were no antiretrovirals. There was no treatment in the country. There weren't even testing kits. So you could tell symptomatically that people were infected, but you couldn't do a test and definitively say that they were infected.
Well, and I heard you say before, maybe through another interview, was it like up to 20% of the country was orphaned or something to that extent? Was that at that time?
Yes,
Wow.
well, during that time, we were losing all of our young people, like young parents, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s were dying. It was just a very odd pandemic where you were losing your middle population, your breadwinners, people that were supposed to take care of the kids and the elderly people, they were
Mm,
dying. And as a result of that, then we had 20% of our nation that became orphaned during that period.
wow. But when you two showed up and on the first trip, did you have a lot of peace? I mean, even in that scenario, you just knew this is where we want to be, this is where we're supposed to be.
I can tell you that the most crazy things have happened, the most unpredictable, but peace has always been there no matter what the situation is. And that can only be explained by God, because if you look at the actual situation or environment, it shouldn't have been peaceful, but it has been.
Yeah. Wow. So what was how did family and people around you so you go there, you come back and you say, we're packing up, we're heading over. Did they see that coming? I guess they kind of knew I mean, I think your parents probably would have known if they would have, really recognized that call on your life. But was it was it shocking? Did you get a little bit more pushback than you thought?
Well, both of our parents have always been very supportive of us being here. They have never guilt tripped us or made us feel badly for not being around, even though obviously we have 6 kids now. We had 2 children after we came to Eswatini, but they've just always been,
Mm.
really supportive. So that's been really helpful. There have been other people that maybe don't quite understand, but as far as our parents, they heard from
Your
a young
core,
age where we
yeah,
were
your
going.
core group.
They
Yeah.
never fought.
Um, did you have to raise support kind of for yourself before you guys went? Like, how did you even, when you first flew in, did you already have a place kind of to stay lined up, and raise support, or would y'all go and find the nearest like hostel type place until you can get your feet on the ground, or how does this work practically?
Well, we flew in, and we're not Nazarenes, but there was a Nazarene mission
Mm.
compound here, and they rented us a house for the first 8 years. We rented a house from them. But at the time when we came in, we didn't know all of how it was going to work out. And that's where we lived until we were able to buy the land that I spoke about. But initially, I had started when the triplets were born. My husband was in residency. I was working in surgery. It didn't really work for both of us to be always at the hospital when we had 3 little babies at home. So I started a real estate development company when they were little, and we used that money as seed
Okay.
money to start in Eswatini. That's how we started. We really didn't ask for any any donations or any funding initially. And then once we had used that nest egg that we had, then we went to our family and friends and churches that we were close to and just said, hey, God's opened the door for us to be in Eswatini, and we believe he wants us to stay, and we're asking you to be part of us staying there for longer than, the first 5 years. And God has just, over the years, continued to provide in that area. It's not really been what I would call the standard way of, or
Yeah,
standard
I
of,
mean, you're giving free healthcare and supporting 700 team members in the meantime, 300,000 people a year. Like that requires money. So yeah, we'll get into that. We'll talk about for a minute, Echo, about the first 8 years, because you've mentioned that a time or two. Like it was kind of hard, but it was also very formative. Like what did you learn about God? Or what was he doing in that years, which could be considered by some Christians like the wilderness, so to speak, you know? What was it kind of like, and what did you learn about the Lord in that time?
I would say maybe from an outsider's view, it looked like the wilderness, but from an insider's view, or the one kind of walking it out, that it was a time that was very deep cultivation of relationship with God. And the things that we learned is like you can trust him no matter what. He knows the end from the beginning, no matter how devastating the situation is. He made the burden light, even though it looked heavy. I mean, we used to, my husband and I we were the only medical people for the first 8 years on our team. Now we have a very big team of medical staff, but at the time it was just he and I working with a team of local staff that were doing like logistics and translation, registration, and those kind of things. And sometimes we would see up to 1,000 people a day, and we would stay. We felt so heartbroken when people would come wait in line that we just decided we wouldn't leave till every person was taken care of. And somehow God gave us the strength to do that. I can't explain it to you. I've seen so many things happen in my time here that if you I would never be able to explain it to you. So once I wouldn't say that people say, did you expect it to get like this? I said, well, God can do miracles, but you don't demand it of him. So I would say it was kind of like that, like we were thrilled by the things that he did. On the other hand, we wanted him to move at his pace and his time. I cannot explain to you how even we walked through those 8 years, but it was, I mean, and our kids are so different as a result of that, because we didn't leave them at home. When we went out and worked the whole day till the middle of the night, they traveled with us. And they were doing video school. And so they would have to stay on the bus to do video school until they were done. And after video school, they get off and help us. And, our 4 oldest boys, like they kind of sat us down after they were teenagers. And the 2 little ones were, real small. And they said, now, how are you going to make sure, because you and dad are not going out? That was so formative to us. It changed who we were. How are you going to make sure that they have the same calling implanted in their hearts? How are they going to get exposure?
Oh,
God's
wow.
opened other doors, but I mean, I could just tell you that watching this even play out with my kids has been so unbelievable. I mean, I thought they would, when they finished high school, would all go to school somewhere. And when we sat down to talk to them, they said, well, dad's taken us everywhere. Well, he hadn't really taken us everywhere. He would
Yeah.
just like, if we were flying back to the United States to see family, we went through Paris, we'd spend a day in Paris. So they felt like they saw everything,
Yeah.
all the world. And they said, Dad's taking us everywhere. We don't need to go explore. We've already been there, And then they all decided to go to Liberty for school. And the triplets have graduated from there. One with a degree in cybersecurity, the second with a degree in international business, and the third one's going to medical school with a degree in business management. So
Wow.
I could have never even guessed that our kids would stay here. They just said, this is where God's, like, you can tell that they have their own calling. And I do believe that those 8 years of just walking with them changed who they were and who they are. And it changed who we are, just to see
Well,
the way.
that's cool. You kind of testified really about that, because I would think most people would say don't go, or a lot of people would say don't go because of the kids. They're so young. What are you doing? And now looking back, it's like they have absolutely loved it, and it's formed them into who they are. That's really neat. So they're all graduated now or almost and on into post-grad school. Yeah.
The triplets are graduated. They just graduated. And then the number 4 is doing business finance at Liberty. And the online schools worked really well. They work and they go to school. They get a lot of
Okay.
practice experience.
That's great. Well, you said something, a couple things I want to camp out on for a minute. You said like you want to really kind of stay in the space, and I've heard you say this on another deal as well, but and I love this, stay in the space where you expect God to do big things, but you don't really have the expectations of what those are or his plan. So that really resonates with me. Like explain that a little bit because it's true because it seems like, and I was having a conversation last week with a guy and I was like, you know, I don't think you can plan. I don't think I could plan anything that's happened, at least in my life, the way I expected it to happen. But it's always been different and better. But how did that work for you guys? At this point.
Hey, y'all. I just want to make an observation. When I see someone going through a legal situation, it seems like there are way too many unknowns. Well, the Allen firm provides legal guidance so that you can make a great decision, come to a resolution, and be at peace. For more information about the Allen firm, visit allenlawfirm.com.
Well, I can tell you that, part of the journey for us has been, we actually several years ago put a policy in place at our organization, a no complaining policy. And it's been very formative for us because we realized that it's very hot here where we lived. For the first 10 years, there was no air conditioning, and you could just complain about environmental things or things all the time. It's hot. I'm tired. You can just go on. And we realized at some stage that being content, no matter where you're at, no matter what's going on, is really key. And so we decided that we wouldn't complain about anything that we couldn't change. And it doesn't mean we don't discuss our problems, but we only talk about those problems to people who are part of the solution. And we all signed this now. Every one of the 700 sign it. They go through training, induction, and we all process it together. And what does this mean? And why do we do this? And I think that some of those things really help when you're waiting on God to do something, or you're waiting on God to resolve something. It's not like this demand. You're content even though the situation is not what you would like it to be or what is ideal. And so I really feel that this, again, I've seen God do the most crazy things. I know you have too, and all believers have. But if it's a demand, it's not the same as when you see him do a miracle. I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me as far as, and maybe tie that into like kind of how you make decisions really. I mean, it's like how, you have these big expectations too and what you would like, but you don't complain. You wait contently, and then you're kind of looking for something to happen, but it may not be exactly as you thought. I mean,
Yeah, there's another thing too, like you can probably tell I have a driven personality. I'm very passionate and, want solutions and want to not give up and, find the way forward. And I remember early on when we were here, my mom's very much like that as well. And my mom and dad were here with us for 10 years when we first came, which was a real blessing to have them around. And I remember my mom used to say, "What are you going to do? What are you going to do?" And I learned at the beginning, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything.
yeah,
Because
that's good advice.
I didn't have that figured out before I came here at all. It's just American, hey, problem, where's the solution?
Yeah, we'll get it done.
But I realized that even if you wait way past when it feels comfortable, you have to wait. Because what I found is when I waited, there would just be that still small voice or like that epiphany. You would just feel that God said, okay, now do that. And if I would have chosen, it wasn't in the multiple choice, the thing that he said to do that was down the road that I didn't know what it was going to be. And so kind of, just saying, we're here. We want you to bring a solution, like hands open. we're not going to demand it from you, but we need you. If you don't come through, we don't know how we're getting there. And then just, waiting. It doesn't mean that you don't put out effort, but it's not the same tug of war with God when you're saying, we need you to solve this now.
And he doesn't, it seems like in my experience with him, in my relationship, it seems like he likes, I don't think in a mean way, but it's usually a little bit last minute to us when he makes the come through or the breakthrough. So has that been your experience over all these years?
Definitely.
It's
I
really
think
good timing at the end when you're like,
he gets the biggest bang out of the buck with his relationship with us when he makes us wait, like, okay.
that is good advice for
I hope that stretch helped you.
any believer listening, and be encouraged because you're on this side of it now and you're on the middle of it, but you're also on this side in your journey and looking back and saying, man, look what he's done. He has been faithful the whole time. Well,
Yeah, I did turn 50 last week.
so
that was a big one. Yeah.
That's great.
Mentally,
well, happy late birthday. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Well, how do you make decisions then? Because talk about that. You mentioned blind faith, and that's kind of been my experience too. He's like, he hadn't really opened the door a lot of times for you in y'all's journey, like where you see a mile down the road, usually he's telling you step here, step here, step here. How do you make decisions? Because you have a really big organization. How do you make decisions on organizational stuff, operating kind of with the next step in front of you? I mean, how do you make it decisions in the Lord and faith? Like, talk about y'all's model for doing that or framework, how you make decisions.
I would say that the foggy steps of faith doesn't mean we don't plan. We are intentional about planning. We have a 5-year strategic plan. We map out, and first, let me say, it's all team. It is, for us, there is nothing without the insights from the entire team. And it's different to listen in another culture than in the culture that you were raised in. People are not as free to give their opinions until they know their opinions matter. And, initially when we first came, I remember sometimes we would sit with staff one-on-one, Harry and I would, and sometimes we would have to be quiet for 5 minutes until somebody felt comfortable to answer back or
just in the room together, just silence for, I mean, that feels like eternity. And
3 people. It was so uncomfortable, but then you started to realize that if you were quiet, if you broke silence, they would not tell you how they felt about something. And you can understand that at that point, we were a highly traumatized nation. Most people had grown up without their parents. They had not experienced love. And there weren't those talks around the dinner table or those talks you would have with mom and dad where you felt safe. And so, it was also a process of rebuilding those social structures where I'm safe even when we don't agree, I'm safe even when we have conflict. All those things had to be rebuilt. And I would say if you came and visited the campus, you would see more of a family environment than institutional environment, although there's the constructs of the structure as well, just for workflow processes. But as far as the question around planning, we do plan, but we are fully ready for God to sideswipe those plans. If we've set out where we think we need to go and God changes the direction, we're willing to do that. But we feel that we're more adaptable, more flexible when we're well planned, well coordinated. I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit like a military operation.
Yeah. Well, you have to. I mean, I want to get to scale. I want to talk to you about scaling too. But I mean, you almost have to. But from what I hear, it sounds like, I mean, you make the plans, what seems right, and then you hold them with an open hand, and then you look for circumstances and things that happen, and then you kind of guide it by peace and listen to the Lord on it.
Yes, and we gather together and we listen to each other. And I've found it takes a lot of time because our culture is shy, quiet. People don't share how they really feel deeply, easily or quickly. We've spent a lot of time building a leadership team, a local leadership team, and very much understanding that without their leadership, we really cannot impact the country that we're working in at all. We're a very small number. We're only 12 Americans out of 700 people, and everyone else is local or other African nationals. Some of our doctors are coming from other countries. But anyway, it's been such a blessing. And now when we sit down and we discuss something that's difficult, we don't know which way to go. We sit in a room with, we have about 25 people on our executive team, about 50 people on senior management, and about 120 middle managers. So we have a very kind of flat organization. And we sit and, hey, this is a challenge and we don't know what to do next. What do you think? And we literally go around the whole table and everybody shares. And then you start to realize you can take 2% from this person, 5% from this person, 8% from this person. And I love what one of our senior staff says. If you ask who did something, this particular staff member will say nobody and everybody. And that's really what you never know at the end who actually came up with a solution, because it's a mixture of everybody's inputs. And that's it's very different than how we are in the United States. We're very individualistic and, kind of what do I do? This is a very collective environment, a very group orientated type of processing of challenges, and then the solutions that come as a result of those. But we believe God has a solution for every challenge, and that's what we try to take to the table and say, okay, this is really hard. It's really, really hard. And we know God's got something up his sleeve we don't understand,
And then you'll get around the table when you're making those hard decisions for real-time challenging issues, and you'll hear from people. I mean, and you'll go around and you'll look for God, and he'll craft a solution through the whole team, which is awesome. Sounds like you've become organizational experts in the meantime. So, so tell us a little bit, Echo, about, I want to get into the campus and scaling and some stuff, and definitely base camp, but give us some tips and encouragement on how you and Harry and some of the leadership team, if they come to mind, hear the Lord on things. Like, what are just do you have some just kind of guidelines you've done to know, this is what I think the Lord's kind of directing us. This is what, just impressions from him. As you read scripture, through songs, through thoughts, just how have you guys operated? And because obviously you hear him, and you guys are guided by him a lot. Probably your whole team, but encourage somebody who may not operate in that space very much, on how to do that and what you've seen in your own lifestyle and your own life.
Unstuck Coaches hates it when movement and progress in a person's life or business is stuck, or frozen, or slowed, or just stopped altogether. Well, we have found a solution. Unstuckcoaches.com. They offer a variety of coaching services to get you or your business moving again. Check out unstuckcoaches.com.
Well, I'll definitely speak from my personal experience in realizing that God speaks in a variety of ways. So it's not a mandate for anyone else, that's for sure. But when I say God spoke to me, I don't hear him in an audible voice. Some people do. But there are times when you don't know which way to go. And then all of a sudden he puts something in your mind or your heart that was never there before. And the peace that follows that, it's either the still small voice or an impression, but the peace that follows that.
Usually like a thought of some kind that wasn't really there begin, and then peace is a really big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Like even if the situation's not peaceful, but the way forward or the guidance that he's given you feels peaceful, that has peace. Typically then we'll always go back to the team and say, we were really praying about what to do about this. We didn't know what to do about it. It could be 2 months or 5 months or 10 months, that you've been waiting for an answer, and say, I feel like God's saying we're supposed to do X. And then God will confirm it through the people that he's put around you, to keep us safe. Because I do think God has created us to not work in an individualistic space,
Yeah.
but to work in a space where the people around you are protecting you. You know, early when we were in Eswatini, okay, we learned leadership on the fly here because you just have to, you know, and it was always a mix. Sometimes the national team was leading us, and sometimes we were leading, and it was, you know, always this ebb and flow of whoever was the best person to lead at that moment. But it has been, I would say the peace is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
You know, if the peace sustains, then you're like, okay. I know
Okay.
where
Yeah.
this
I'm not going to ignore that any
is.
longer. I can, yeah. Yeah. I have a group too that I can send stuff to. Like, hey, I think this is what I'm hearing. I need you to confirm it. It needs to line up with scripture. Does it have to? Okay. That's good. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for speaking on that. Well, tell us about the Miracle Campus, and then let's get into how do you scale an organization that their main heart is compassion. Like you said it before, how do you scale compassion to the degree y'all have scaled it? So first, explain the Miracle Campus again, and then like, how do you go from 12 to 700 members and scale compassion on that level?
Well, the Miracle Campus was actually named the Miracle Campus before we ever got it. We just drew on a piece of paper that we felt that at some point God would provide a permanent home for the Luke Commission in Eswatini. As I mentioned, we rented before that. Patients came to that house we rented all the time. We like had IV lines hanging on the trees outside, and we stayed in one room with the 4 boys for the first 8 years we were here. Every other room was like where the pharmaceuticals were stored, where the supplies were stored. But in 2013, in February, on the 9th of February, one of our board members, our board in Eswatini is where strategic control direction comes from. In 2011, the United States board shifted strategic control direction to the Eswatini board, which has been so great because they just understand, you know, the nuances of the country so much better than trying to communicate back to the United States. So our Eswatini board chairman told us that there was a piece of land that was available, and we had actually been given a piece of land 3 years prior in the center of the country, but there were squatters on that land, and we had applied to the courts on how we would help them to a new location, relocate them. And crazily enough, the court struck that year. The lawyers struck, there wasn't one civil or criminal case that was heard for an entire year. So we went back. By that time, this one house was like just getting, we couldn't move in there, you know. And we went to the board and we said, in your experience, how long will it take to resolve this? And they said, well, when the courts open, it'll be anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. They were like, whoa, 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So
Nobody needs to complain about our legal system from lawyer people.
So the board chairman said, why don't you go look at this piece of land? And so we went and looked at the piece of land, and we had actually looked at it 3 years prior. And for a variety of reasons, Harry and I felt, well, it was really me. I didn't want to pay for land. That was the whole thing. You know, it's like, no, I wanted to get a piece of land we didn't pay for, you know?
Yeah. Come on, Lord. Yeah.
This other piece was donated to us. And so we drove on this property. We're only like 50 feet into the property, and Harry and I looked at each other and we knew that this is where God wanted us to be. Again, the peace was just there. I mean, we just knew. And so on the 11th of February, we signed a contract to buy the land, and the owner told us that he needed money quickly. If we could pay for the land by the end of February, he would give us a 10% discount. Now, we didn't have a penny raised for the land because remember, we're going to pay for land. We had raised money for building on the other land, but we had money for buildings, not for land. So we just wrote an email to our friends and family and said, hey, God opened the door for us to buy this land. And if we pay by the end of the month, which is only 17 days away because it's February, then we can get a 10% discount. And by the 26th of February, all the money for the land had come in, plus enough money to do this survey. And we paid for that land on the 26th of February. And I mean, I'll never forget that in the shortest month of the year, not even leap year, God gave us land in 17 days. It was crazy.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
There was nothing on that land. It was just a blank piece of land with an old dairy barn that was being used as a backpacker's lodge, but had been abandoned a few years prior. And so we started moving down from the other place and establishing that land. But today, our team, our in-house construction team, has built 25 buildings there, including the largest oxygen plant in the continent of Africa and all kinds of other crazy, amazing things they've done. All overseen by our local team, local construction manager that's overseeing the entire project. And it's just been unbelievable. It is a miracle campus, but you can understand what happened at that place.
Well, I know, and
God's
I'll tell people, get on lootcommission.org and you can just see kind of one of the main facilities with the oxygen plant. It's amazing. I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, like I was not expecting that at all. So, okay, you go from 12 to 700 members, and compassion is the biggest deal, one of the biggest deals. And if you need to roll base camp into this as well, just to help talking about it, do that. But how do you get everybody to grow compassion with you? Like, how does that happen?
Well, I can tell you that the number of patients started increasing, and we knew that if God didn't help us grow a team, that, obviously there was just a very small limit to what we could do, our small group. I do remember that one very close advisor of mine at the time told me that, Echo, you can't scale compassion. It's something that comes from the heart. And I heard her because I knew how big a deal calling was to the whole equation, but I just could not accept that God could not do in someone else's heart what he had started doing in our hearts, So we, of course, now have this land. And of course, once you have the land, people just start coming. Now we've built a hospital there and there's all these things going on. And I remember about 7 years ago, God just said to us that you're spending all your time taking care of the physical needs of everybody around you. What are you doing to heal the hearts of the adult orphans who work for you? And I was like, whoa.
Oh, there we go. Oh, man.
What do I do with this? And I knew he was right. Because when I looked around and the other thing that happened when we moved down, God allowed us to rent a house close to the campus. And we started inviting the staff over to the house for like spiritual retreats and, renewal periods and stuff like that. And I started hearing from them in this like family environment, the horrific things that had happened to them as children. And I realized that people are so wounded, there's no way they can heal.
Oh. Yeah, like a broken can't heal the broken, or help the broken.
And the second thing God said to us, to me specifically, is that, and you also have an orphan spirit. All of you. It doesn't matter if you grew up with your parents, it doesn't matter if you're physically orphan. All of us have orphan spirits.
Talk about that too, Echo, as you keep explaining that. I want to talk about the orphan spirit specifically.
I think there's physical orphanhood, and then there's orphanhood where we don't really understand how big God is and how much he can do in our lives. And there's a poverty mindset that we have and how we approach the day-to-day things that happen to us and the big things that happen to us in life. And I could see that definitely very visibly in the lives of people who had lost their parents. But I also realized that all of us have formative things that happen to us probably in our childhood and our growing up, or maybe as young adults, that if you don't work through, every time somebody gets close to that, pushes that button, you have an unexplainable emotional reaction to it. And it hampers our growth or our ability to serve other people. And so when he said that, it really impressed on Harry and I. And by this time, we had built a pastoral care team, a spiritual care team. So we shared this with them. And everybody was on the same page. Like, yeah, we have to do something. We can see that there's no way that people can heal when they're wounded. When you wound, you wound. When you're healed, you heal. Not that healing is like a destination, it's a process, but that's when the base camp came. And God was very specific to us to say, you need to stop hiring people and just sending them directly to their place where they serve or where they work. You need to explain to them what God has called the Loot Commission to. What does it look like to serve with a heart of compassion? What does it look like to take care of people like your own family member? You're expecting people to understand what he called you to, but you haven't given them the background or the explanation. So we started what's a 10-week onboarding process for us, which, to be honest with you, of anything we've done, has been by far the most transformational thing that has ever happened in these 20 years.
Oh, I mean, and you get into, I mean, I was blown away when I saw that. One, also because of the length of it and the importance that you all have placed on it. And that makes sense on how you took from there to get people who are healthy and whole, internally as well. I mean, and finding these things that have wrecked us for all of our lives to really a whole person really serving in their full capacity and probably their identity. I can't imagine what that's like. I mean,
Yeah, it's been unbelievable to watch, just, people that come in that have not really had a place where they've been able to share their whole life, what pain they've gone through. And then we start the process. It's very collective at the beginning, where we're building relationship. There's many things that we do and we've learned over these past 7 years on just how to navigate this space, because we're building a relationship with people. Of course, you want them to be open. That doesn't happen immediately. So at the beginning, we do more leadership development, personal development. We do not everyone that works for us, they're not all Christians. They don't have to be. But we do trainings on Christian living. We use a mix of videos from around the world, different speakers, and we have live facilitation from staff. And then we also...
How big is the group, Echo, that you would run people through at a time?
It can be anywhere from 6 to 60. It depends
okay.
on how many people we need to be bringing into the,
Okay.
it's about every 6 weeks that we rotate a
Okay.
team through. But we have about 40 senior managers that facilitate, and nobody facilitates more than 2 sessions during those 10 weeks. That is so people build a relationship with the entire team. They don't become dependent on one person or trust one person, but they develop a trust relationship with the entire leadership team. And then about week 3 or 4, start to move into some of the more hard areas.
Mm-hmm.
And our own staff comes in, and either by video or in live presentation, they share about the things that have happened to them in their life and where they build up offenses or walls or anger towards people that have done really terrible things to them, actually, and how they were able to experience inner healing and how much it's changed their life. So we use the testimonies of staff in order to minister to the next group of people coming in. And then at the end of every day, people write reflection questions. We're completely digitized, but when it comes to reflection questions, we do write.
Mm-hmm.
And, after the session about inner healing or forgiveness, it asks, like, is there anyone you would like to be reconciled with? Everyone says yes.
Wow.
The next question is, would you want one of our counselors to facilitate a reconciliation with whoever that person is? Everyone says yes. And then senior pastoral staff or counseling staff will call maybe a father who's been absent for 20 years, hasn't seen this kid. The kid is now an adult, has not been able to go to university because dad wasn't around to pay the school fees. So his life is not what he would like it to be, so there's all this anger that I'm using an example, all this anger that's been built. It's not just when people lose their family members, when there's absenteeism in some of, families. So I'm telling you, I'm not present when these things happen. I just watch from afar, like, God, what are you doing? Like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen, where people are reconciling with people that they have not seen for 15 years or 20 years. And once people are able to work through that process, it is like they are free. They are free. It doesn't mean that, okay, I forgave that one person or I reconciled with that one person, so my life is fine now. But once you experience that once or twice, you recognize it can happen over and over and over again. And that inner healing is this continual process that happens when I have pain. I talk about it, I work through it, I hear from the Lord on it, and I can't explain it to you. Now we've had 2,300 people go through this program, and I could go on the whole night talking to you about the physical miracles that we've seen, like the building of the oxygen plant. That should have never been able to happen like it did. It happened. The development of all these innovations that we've been able to do, and all this work that the team's done together, and the number of patients they can see, and the way they do what they do. And I've been invited around the world. Since COVID, we took care of 90% of our ICU patients in the whole country at our facility during COVID. I mean, the things that we've seen happen. When I go around, and I've been asked to go around the world and speak about these things, and when I go talk about those things, when they hear the story, their first question is, we want to talk about what happened with your staff. How do you get them to do this? I don't get them to do this.
Yeah, that was my question too on how do you navigate the pushback maybe? Or is there even pushback from them on wanting to go through it? I'm assuming there's a little bit on some people, but all the thousands of testimonies probably will change that at this point.
At the beginning, it was very controversial. At the beginning, not really with the staff, but externally.
Yeah.
But now everyone can see. You can't deny the power of this process. And another thing, there's several things that we do. We realize that sometimes there's silos inside of an institution or a hospital or whatever sector it is. And the fact that we don't work well together and we work in our departments and don't really recognize the value of other departments is a problem. And so now every staff member will rotate around to the different departments for a half a day or a full day while they're in the base camp process, so that they understand what value the rest of the team brings to the table. I mean, these things, you think they're so simple. I've asked to speak at this conference for the last 3 years. The first year they wanted me to talk about COVID, the second year, stuff. This year, all they wanted me to talk about was base camp. Every single session was about base camp. Every day, that's all they wanted me to talk about. And I have so many requests on the table right now of follow-ups of other faith-based institutions in the world that want to be intentional about their onboarding process. I'm telling you, I can't explain it to you. It has transformed us more than I can believe. And that's where the scaling of compassion happened.
I was about to say, with that process, you can change the country. I mean, I would see, I would think that is that powerful. You change the people and make them healthy and free and whole. And I can't imagine the impact that's having on the whole country.
You would tell me when we were 7 people that you can't scale compassion, but I've seen it happen with 700 people. And I believe that it can be 70,000 and 700,000 and 7 million. I do not believe this has to stop with the 700 people that we've seen it happen with. I believe these are things that God's given to all of us that he wants to multiply around the world. And the things our staff have been through, they should have given up 1,000,000 times, and they don't. They don't. How can you explain a team that stands up and takes care of 90% of a nation's ICU cases? And I realize now, Josh, God was preparing us for that.
Wow, that's amazing. Because they're resilient, healthy.
If we were still in our original state, we would have collapsed with that pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't burnout, people. I mean, now at the same time, we realized that we needed to be very intentional. So the same team that's doing base camp is also like the pastoral care and spiritual staff development team. And they would go to the hospital on every change of shift. And they would pray and counsel and meet with any staff member who had seen something traumatic or felt traumatized during that shift during COVID. Wow. Every single 12 hours they were there, rotating like that with the patients, with the staff, with the patients, with the staff. And that still happens today. So there are things that we learned in those deepest, darkest hours of the biggest crisis we've seen. At the same time we had COVID, we had massive civil unrest in our country that were just crisis after crisis after crisis. Mm-hmm. And, these simple principles of inner healing have sustained us through no matter what the enemy's throwing at us. So there's a lot we could talk about, but I told you that we built this oxygen plant. Okay. Then we had all the oxygen we needed in the third wave, cut the case fatality rate in the country in half. some entrepreneur gave us like so many ventilators. We had 60 ventilators in the third wave. We had 12 in the second wave. I mean, like God did things I can't explain, but all the ventilators in the world, all the oxygen in the world, and all the resources in the world, it doesn't mean anything if you don't have people willing to do the hard work. And that's what I've seen from the team, a resilience I can't explain, a compassion I can't explain. I can just tell you a short story about a young lady that was sitting, we had a week-long audit by one of our donors a couple weeks ago. And so I was sitting in a boardroom with some people that I don't usually sit with. And there was a young lady there. I know her face, but I've never talked to her before in our organization. And the people that were doing the audit were so intrigued by this scaling of compassion. They were talking about the same thing, you know. And they said, so how does it work? Like, what is happening? They were so mystified. I said, I don't know, maybe you can ask them. And I just pointed to people I've never talked to before and just, you know, and one young lady says, I am so changed. My community doesn't know me. My family doesn't know me. Everybody sees the difference in my life. And then she says to them, you don't fake compassion.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, my goodness,
Oh,
I've
my
never heard her speak before and just listen to her being a champion of compassion, you know? So it's something that I won't understand for the rest of my life.
Well, I thought about the verse, you know, like came to heal the brokenhearted, set the captives free. I mean, that's what you guys are doing. And it's changing everything. Wow.
What he's doing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's answer these two things, and I guess we should wrap it up. I I'm blown away. It's just unbelievable. Well, first, tell people how can they help the Luke Commission? I mean, we know prayer, but is there a way for them to support it? How do they do that? Do you guys allow trips over? Do you host like churches or groups or any kind of mission stuff? And then just financially, what's a good way to support?
We do host people. We have visitors coming all the time, and we love having visitors come because we feel that once they come and get their feet on the ground, we like to call them vision trips. You know, like come and taste and see what God's doing here, and you have a circle of influence we don't have. I am not going to be shy about this. The number of patients coming to see us has grown 450% in the last 5 years. It is a big challenge to figure out how to sustain the impact of compassion because people love being loved. So they go where they're loved. And, you know, taking care of that number of patients, while we're willing to do it, it obviously requires resources. So we are definitely in a process where we're looking for new partners, looking for new partnerships, and would love to interact with anyone who would like to be part of our team. And you can just contact us at info@lukecommission.org. Just go to the site and contact us, but I appreciate the question because that's
Yeah, no, I mean, that impact,
impact.
yeah, financial support and resources is a big deal for moving the mission forward. Well, wrap us up with this, Echo. What do you now know about God in this stage and we kind of started with this a little bit as well, you know, at this point in the Luke Commission's history that you didn't know maybe when you first came over?
I
And
would say that
maybe you know it, but you know what I'm saying. Maybe you know it in your head versus know it in your heart. But what do you know, what comes to mind?
I would say that, you know, obviously, like I grew up, as I mentioned, in church. We memorized so much scripture. I could memorize a lot of scripture, but what I can tell you is it's come to life here. It means what it says. It's not something we say and listen to, but it's something that you see breathing, living. And I'm really grateful, you know, for some of those scriptures that bring hope when it looks like there's no hope. Because those are the things that you lean on when things are really tough. So, you know, it's a mountaintop and a valley experience all at the same time. It's kind of like hanging on the edge of a cliff, and knowing that he's always there is really big part of going on to the next day. And so
That's
we're really grateful for his faithfulness. That's what I can say.
Yeah, he's faithful. Okay, well, I would encourage people. Thank you, Echo VanderWal. What an amazing story. And I would encourage people to check out lootcommission.org. You can email in if you want to have questions on partnership, how to support, and that's info@lootcommission.org. Is that right, Echo? And check it out and, learn about them, support them, maybe go visit them. So that'd be awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time and making the time. I'm really, really grateful. And we'll be praying that the Lord continues to bless you and navigate you through, challenging things. And He keeps changing the country through you and everyone else out there. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Josh. Thanks, Micah. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us on this latest edition to the StoryField podcast. We hope that you have been challenged, inspired, and ready to take that next step, whatever that is. If you know someone with an amazing story that needs to be heard, send us an email at info@thestoryfield.com. Have a fantastic day, and we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of The StoryField.